Shalom, everyone. We're going to have to be good. The boss is here. Hello, everyone. Shalom. Tonight is the fourth night. Well, it's actually the fifth night, but we're going to do Daniel 4 this time. And for some, I sent out outlines or notes if they wanted them. And so you get an idea. But we're going to start in verse number 32 of chapter 3. Now, the reason I want to start there is, let me go back through this. Christianity decided on chapter and verse. It was not determined by God or the Hebrew people. The best example I can give you is in the book of Malachi that goes along with this. Malachi, if you read your Christian Bible, you will find you have 4 chapters, the last chapter having 5 verses. Understanding, many believe that the reason that there's a separation for these last 5 verses is because it's too Jewish. And so they separated it out so that Jesus would be coming and Elijah would be announcing him. In this particular case, I think it's just a misunderstanding of what's going on. But verse 32 and 33 really go into what we're talking about as far as the events of the tree. And so I want to start with those 2 verses because I think they're a prelude to what's going on. It begins by saying, "It behooves me to relate the signs and the wonders that the supreme God has performed for me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom and his dominion for all generations." I think he wanted to, this was part of this chapter. In fact, the sages agree with me, or I agree with them actually, in the fact that what's happening is before he speaks, he's giving us some understanding. Understand, this is not Daniel who's writing this. Daniel does not, the first 6 chapters of this book were written by the sages. They were the ones responsible for it. That's why we go from first person to third person and back now. In this chapter, we're going to be in first person again, because the person talking will be Nebuchadnezzar, not Daniel, but Nebuchadnezzar. And so we're going to be listening to his understanding or his thoughts by way of the sages. Now, some of the book of Daniel, like in the book of Jeremiah, and I don't know how thorough you've read Jeremiah, but some of Jeremiah's book is really notes, recollections. And that's the same way that Daniel is covered in these first few chapters. And so I want us to begin by understanding a little bit about what's going on. Now, when we talk about signs and wonders, as it goes on through here, we need to put together chapter 3 and chapter 4 because there's a correlation, or there's a relationship between the two. First off, we have to understand some of the signs and some of the wonders that are going on. In fact, the book of the Sanhedrin gives us 7 examples of signs and wonders. The first is the floor of the kiln raised to ground level to allow Nebuchadnezzar to see what was going on. The fact that the walls of the kiln themselves were actually breached by the heat. The fact that the plaster that was on the kiln actually fell off, according to the literal text. The image that was overturned on his face was overturned in the plain of Dura. The plain of Dura was also the same place where Ezekiel was building together the dry bones. Both happened in the plain of Dura. Both happened, according to the sages, on Rosh Hashanah. So there was a relationship between what was going on. We have to understand that Daniel and Ezekiel and Jeremiah all were acting at the same time. Jeremiah in the city, Daniel in Babylon, and in the outer areas, that's where Ezekiel was. And so the 3 prophets really are going to fit together at different places through the whole text. So I wanted you to be aware of that. Also, I want you to notice the fact that Nebuchadnezzar is going to go mad, which is something that shouldn't happen, but does happen in this particular case. And they call it a sign. Now, The chapter is written with a different style. Like I've already mentioned the fact that it's Nebuchadnezzar who's actually speaking. I, first person. Yet, as we go through, look what happens. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was tranquil in my house, and vigorous or flourishing is another word that's used in my palace. So the vision that happens to here, or the dream that he has at this particular point in time, is a dream that happens while he's relaxed. There's nothing to stress him, but yet he'll become distressed after it. Now, remember 2 times ago when we started talking about dreams, I want to review 3 things with you about dreams. Most of our dreams today are not messages from God. They are simply thoughts that are being recycled through our minds. Every night when you go to bed, all the events of the day are really memory scraps that your brain takes and identifies those things that are useful and stores them away. The rest is debarked, gotten rid of. The second thing I want you to know is it's a dream's interpretation that actually causes it to be fulfilled. If you want a dream if you want to know what a dream means and you ask for help, you are opening yourself up for the dream itself to be a part of you. That's what happens with Nebuchadnezzar in this point. Nebuchadnezzar asks people to explain it to him. If he would have never gone that far, this chapter would never have happened. The third thing I want you to understand is, in addition, a bad dream can be turned into a good one, depending on who your interpreter is. You see, the interpreter is the one who has the power to change the words. He can create or frame it in such a way that it's positive as opposed to negative. We might call it political speech, but the idea is the fact that the interpreter controls the dialogue that's going to go on. So Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. He's very peaceful at this point in time, and everything is going well in the kingdom. But yet at the same point in time, verse 2 says, I saw a dream that frightened me, and my thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head bewildered me. So I issued a command to bring before me all the sages of Babylon, so that they should make known to me the interpretation of the dream. So he becomes frightened by the dream itself. The dream causes the fright to happen. Later on, when he's talking to Daniel, he's going to refer to it as dreams, plural. Now, whether that means that he had multiple dreams that night, or whether he had parts and pieces and he put it together, nobody knows for sure. But the idea is that there are dreams going on. Now, he has these visions in his head, and it's going to be a Gentile kind of a way. So he issues the command for all the sages to come. Problem? Daniel doesn't come. So the question became, why doesn't Daniel arrive? Well, the sages believed that the reason he didn't arrive is because of the way the command was given. Command all the Babylonians, the sages of Babylonia. Well, how do you interpret Babylonia? Does Babylonia mean the Chaldeans? Or does Babylonia mean all of them have become Babylonian? That's a problem. And it appears to be the reason why Daniel doesn't appear right away. Others say he just simply took his time to get there. He didn't arrive on time, and so they began to interpret the dream without him. Well, actually, they didn't interpret anything. Notice the characters that have been called and what they're there for. Look at verse 4. Then the necromancers. Those are the ones like the witch of Endor, and I'll bring her up again later. The witch of Endor, she's the one who brings the dead spirits up. That's what she's about. The astrologers, we understand. The Chaldean stargazers, those again who use the planets to help identify what the future holds. And then they invite the demonists. So in other words, there's a whole structure that deals with demons. All of those things are within Daniel. Daniel understands all of it. It's not the fact that he's been limited to one thing. In fact, that's why he becomes the head of all of this. So I related the dream before them, but they could not make known to me the interpretation. Now the question then becomes, could they not, or did they not want to? Could they have understood what the dream was actually going to say, and they had no way to frame it in a positive manner? He goes on to say, at last there came before me Daniel. So Daniel now enters the room. But Daniel's name here is Belshazzar. And why is he Belshazzar? Because Nebuchadnezzar names him after his God. So it goes on to say, after the name of my God, and whom is the spirit of, notice what it says, the holy God, and I related the dream before him. Question. Look at that last half of that verse and look what happens in the next verse. In whom is the spirit of the holy God, and I related the dream before him. He related the dream before Belshazzar or before Daniel. He goes on to say, Belshazzar, chief of the necromancers, since I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you. So is he asking Belshazzar to interpret the dream, or is he asking Daniel, did God interpret the dream for me? Or is this after the fact? In other words, he goes through the entire thing. And as we're listening to this, we're listening to a repetition of the events that happened that day. And he's inserting facts as he goes along to help explain what's going to happen to him later as he begins to evolve, so to speak, if you use that word. Verse 7 says, these were the visions. Do you see? Visions. So it wasn't just one, but it was either a plural series or it was a repetition of a dream. Again, would go much like what we would find in chapter 2 when we talked about the image that was there. So these were the visions of my head upon my bed. I was watching, and behold, the tree in the midst of the earth, the height of it was great. The tree grew and became strong, and its height reached to the heavens. It was visible to the ends of the entire earth. And its foliage was beautiful and its fruit plentiful, and there was food in all of it. Under the beasts of the field, shade, and the birds of the heaven nested in the branches, and all of flesh was fed from it. Now in the visions, again, in the visions of my head upon the bed, I was watching, and behold, and here we're going to have a question. My text says a holy angel came down from heaven. So I'm going to cover that word later. I just want you to notice that phrase. A holy angel came down from heaven. He cried out loud and said, chop down the tree and cut off its branches, cast down its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the animals move away from under it and the birds from its branches. However, leave its major roots in the ground, secured with a band of iron and copper in the herbage of the field, and let it be washed with the dew of heaven, and let its lot be together with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Now, in our story then, we're looking at a lot of different things, but I want you to look at the tree differently. Yes, it's speaking of what you would call Nebuchadnezzar, but I want you to look at it as a metaphor. You see, it's about pride. You know how pride grows and expands? That's what's going on. As Nebuchadnezzar becomes more and more powerful, as the tree continues to grow, it begins to spread out to cover all kinds of things. And the same point of time, as it's covering things, things seem to be getting fed. Everything is being taken care of. The earth is becoming well watered. That's why the Babylonian Empire was such a great empire, because the people within the empire did not starve. They took care of all the people, including the Jews. In fact, that'll become more obvious when we read what the remedy was by Daniel offering. But as we're going through this, understand that the tree, yes, it's Nebuchadnezzar, but more importantly, it's pride. That's what it's about, pride and arrogance. So as we're going through and we're looking at this whole thing, I want you to see several more things in this story. Where do I go from here? So Nebuchadnezzar shares his dream. The dream is about pride. Daniel does not interpret for us the meaning of the branches or the meaning of the fruit, the leaves, all of those other things. The sages begin to try to pull it apart and understand what the rest of the thing that it's about. Many of the times the sages would agree that the branches represent armies, people, generations. Others would say that the idea of the branches was, well, the branches was the government, that the leaves and on the trees, those represented people, or they represented the armies of Nebuchadnezzar. All of this was about the domination of this nation. But then they begin to talk about the people, the animals being the Gentiles, the Goy. The birds, on the other hand, represented Israel. They go back to the book of Genesis and Abraham. Remember, Abraham had the cutting of the pieces. He was allowed to cut the animals, the 3 beasts that he had, but he was not allowed to cut the birds. The birds were to remain whole. And so they understand that the birds and the trees represented Israel itself. So there was lots of things going on. Now, I find a difference in verse 11 that I have to deal with. And in looking at that, he cried out loud. Well, let me do verse 10 first. In this vision of my head upon the bed, I was watching, and behold, a holy angel came down from heaven. So the question is, a holy angel came down. We know Daniel does not talk with God. So we know that the character that we're looking at is not God. It's not the Shekinah. It's nothing to do with him, but it's an angel. Well, there's several thoughts about this word that's used here. And the word is ear. Ear is Ein Yud Resh, ear. It means watcher, watcher. So the watcher came down. Okay, so who's the watcher that comes down? Or what is a watcher? Well, Pesachita, which is another one of the Midrashic writings, deals with this character. In the book of Genesis, remember, there were 70 nations. God placed over each of those nations a watcher, someone who was responsible for that nation. And so he sent down an angel at that particular point in time. The angel he would have sent down, according to the sages, was the angel who was in charge of Babylon. Why does he send him down? To lower him. In other words, he was at the pedestal. God controls the governments. We don't. We may never understand why what's going on in the United States is going on, because we'll never understand why God chose to allow whatever he's allowed so far in our nation. But the understanding is that it's God who is in control. And therefore, each of these angels move up or down based upon his decisions. We know that he's moving down here in this case because what is Nebuchadnezzar about? It's about pride and arrogance. So he is going to pressure or push down on that nation, on Babylon. And he's pushing specifically on Nebuchadnezzar as we watch. So our story is about a watcher who's coming down. Now, other people, Rabbi Nachman, who is a tremendous scholar, said there's another way of looking at this. And he says the angel that's coming down isn't really an angel. It's Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, Shimon Bar Yochai was the Kabbalistic influence back in the 1st century. Shimon Bar Yochai was a tremendous scholar. Now, he comes by this by looking at words that are in the Hebrew text, or in the Aramaic text, actually. because this is in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. And he goes down to the verse that's the last of verse number 10. And again, it begins with Ir, Kodesh. And then the question is, what is Kodesh? That's holy in Hebrew. It's also holy in Aramaic. So the holy, or the watcher and the holy one, the watcher and the holy one, men shemna, nahat. Take the first letter of each of those words, and you create for yourself an anagram. The anagram says this is Shimon. And so Rabbi Nachman says that he didn't send down an angel, he sent down Shimon Bar Yochai. So in other words, the future is now becoming part of the present. That's what his intention of saying that Shimon is the one that's coming down. The holy ones, again, there are 10 basic groups of angels. There are angels. Archangels are not a group. Archangels is a level above the group. In other words, it's like a rank. A watcher is a rank. A holy one is a rank. So these are three characters that are ranked above the general population of angels. And so as they're beginning to go through this, we begin to see that the tree itself is going to be under attack by God through. If you look at verse 13, it begins by saying, they will change the heart from the man, and the beast's heart will be given to it, and 7 periods will pass over it. So something's going to happen. The tree no longer is a tree. The tree now becomes a beast of the field. So literally, we're morphing character. And remember, this is Nebuchadnezzar talking. And yet at the same point in time, here in this verse, it's in the third person. So someone else is inserting this understanding for us. So the tree becomes a beast, and a beast of the fields. Now, as you go through the Midrashic writings, you're going to find that the beast of the fields, well, the 7 business, 7 periods. Well, what's a period? Is it a year? Or is it a transition within the animal itself? Now, in the book of Daniel, in the 7th chapter, we're going to see a lion that begins to become a man. Well, here we're seeing the reverse of that. So the question is, what's going on? What am I supposed to begin to see out of this activity or this action? And so what I'm looking at this particular point in time is there's transition from a peaceful world that I'm in control of to the fact that I've now become the lowliest of the beings in this world that I've created for myself. Now, over this period of time, we can't tell what the beast is thinking. Most beasts don't think. They eat, they survive. This beast doesn't seem to be worried about any of the nations around it or anything else. In fact, imagine Babylon. How does Babylon get along without its king? What did they do? What's happening? Well, we have to go back to the first verse and understand that there was no invasion. There was no attack going on. Everything was peaceful. And so they allow this event to continue. Why? Because Daniel can tell them exactly what's happening and how that it's going to end. So everyone holds steady during this entire period of time, whatever 7 periods are. So 7 periods are 7 years, 7 periods can be 7 months, 7 periods can be 7 changes in the beast. There's nothing that tells us what 7 periods are. That's the problem. So we go on from there as we move down through the text. So in verse number 14, the matter is by decree of the angels, or the watchers. The watchers. God does not sentence everyone. He has a heavenly Sanhedrin. The watchers make up this heavenly Sanhedrin, or the holy ones, whichever one, I'm not sure, but there's one of those groups, according to the sages, and they can't agree. So I'm successfully saying, I agree with both of them. But the idea is that the angels are in charge, and they sentence it is by word of the holy ones. Here's your Kadesh. Here's your holy ones. So all the living beings may know that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of man, giving it to whomever he wishes and appointing the lowest of men over it. So the Sanhedrin creates the decree. He is going to become a beast. What they can't decide is whether he should live or die. God controls that. And so the most that they can do after consulting with God is to simply allow him to exist in the fields. And that's what exactly is going to happen. Now, verse 15 says, this dream I saw, I, Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, and you, Belshazzar, tell its interpretation, because all the sages of my kingdom are unable to make the interpretation known to me. Well, all the sages would not include Daniel. Maybe that's why he was left out from the very beginning. No one really knows, just the idea. But you can. Why? Because the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. Again, does he know this, or will this become an assumption after the fact? Now, Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, was silent for a while, and his thoughts confounded him. Did you hear that? He could not decide. He could not figure it out. Now, remember, he does never talk with God. So within him, he has the ability to understand the dream. I think part of his slowness was to create the right words. How am I going to share with the king of Babylon that you're going to find yourself in the field? How are you going to do that? So he pauses at that point in time. Its interpretation not bewildered you. But Nebuchadnezzar replied, my Lord, may this dream be upon your foes and its interpretation upon your enemies. So he's not speaking directly to Nebuchadnezzar, but he's speaking to the fact that you, Nebuchadnezzar, have to understand, may it be to them, not to you, but I'm going to have to tell you what's going on. The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached into the heavens and which was visible to the entire earth, whose foliage was beautiful, whose fruit plentiful, with food for all that is under it, under which dwell the beasts of the field and those in whose branches nested the birds of heaven. It is you, O king, who have grown and become powerful. Your greatness has grown and reached the sky, and your dominion to the end of the earth. Notice, and that which the king saw, the holy angel came down from heaven, the watcher came down from heaven and said, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the major root and the ground secured with a band of iron and copper and iron and the herbage of the field. And it will be washed by the dew of heaven, and a lot will be with the beasts and the field until the 7 periods are over. This is the interpretation. Now he gets into the point. So he's confronted or reconfirmed what he's understood him to say. Verse 22, they will drive you from mankind. Who will drive him from mankind? Who is going to do that? And your dwelling will be among the beasts of the field, and they will feed you like grass like oxen, and wash you with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods will pass over you until they recognize that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of man, and he gives it to whomever he wishes. Again, notice Daniel constantly reminds him, it's who God wishes. It's not who we wish, it's who God wishes. So that is the determination. As to that which they have seen, leave the major roots of the tree, your kingdom will remain for you. So don't worry, the kingdom will still be there when this is all over, after you recognize that the heavens rule. Nevertheless, O king, I have some advice for you. Now, the sages say what's happening now is detrimental to Daniel. Daniel is giving him advice on how to deal with what's about to happen. In fact, he's giving him a remedy to keep it from happening. Let my advice be acceptable to you. Redeem your sin through righteousness and your iniquities through kindness. Kindness to whom? To the poor. Charity. One can make sin go away with charity. In other words, you can undo your wrongs. Not completely. That requires also prayer, asking forgiveness. But the idea is that, yes, there is a way to get through it. Perhaps there will be an extension to your tranquility. And the answer was, verse 25, and this befell King Nebuchadnezzar, and the end of 12 months, he was walking atop the royal palace of Babylon. For 12 months, he gave charity. Now, the question is, to whom did he give the charity? The answer is he was giving the charity, according to the Midrash, he was giving the charity to the Jewish people that were not inside Babylon, but all of those where we would say Ezekiel was, to those outside of the city of Babylon. Those were the people that needed the help at that point in time. So he was helping them maintain themselves at this point. But something changes after 12 months. It's at that point that the king exclaimed and said, "Is this not the great Babylon which I have built up to the royal house with my powerful strength for glorification of my splendor?" All of the things that he had done are all undone with one thought. Again, back to the pride, back to the understanding. It's mine. I did it. We can't take credit for the things that we do. God was the one who put us in this situation. God is the one who helped us get through. God is the one who gave us the answers. It's not us. It's always God. You did what you did growing up, maturing, because of what God put in you, those attributes that you needed in order to be successful at what you were doing. Well, in verse 20, it says, while the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. The word voice is kol. The Midrash says that the angel that was over Babylon, its name was kol. Its name was voice. So in our story, the angel called voice fell. That's what the Jewish understanding is. That was their angel. Of the 70 angels, that was the name of their angel. To you, King Nebuchadnezzar, we say, the kingdom has departed from you. We are driving you from mankind. We, the people within the city, are driving you out. And your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field, and they will feed you grass like oxen. And 7 periods will pass over you until you recognize that the Supreme One, notice when this ends is when you recognize. When you recognize that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of man, and he gives it to whomever he wishes. Again, the kingdoms that are going to follow that we see in Daniel 7, those kingdoms last only as long as God wants them to. When God says it's done, it's done. At that moment, the decree befell Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from mankind, and he ate grass like oxen, and his body was washed with the dew of heaven until hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his nails like the bird's talon. Eagles are vicious animals. The bird's talons, again, claws. But now at the end of the 7 periods, notice, I, Nebuchadnezzar, first person, raised my eyes to heaven, and my senses returned to me. Why? because I look to heaven. When all else fails, where should one be looking for answers? Heaven. I bless the Supreme One, and I praised and glorified the Eternal One, whose rule is the eternal rule, and whose kingship is for all generations. All the inhabitants of the earth are reckoned as nothing, and he acts according to his will with his host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, what you have done, or what have you done? So at that time, my senses returned to me, and I returned to the glory of my kingdom. My appearance came back to me, and my ministers and nobles sought me. I was reestablished over the kingdom, and additional greatness was given to me. In other words, he had not reached the height yet. He thought he had, but God is going to make it even better than it was after 7 periods in the field. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, notice he doesn't say King Nebuchadnezzar now. He doesn't equate himself with high stature. He equates himself as being Nebuchadnezzar, a person. Praise, extol, and glorify the King of heaven, whose actions are all in truth, and whose paths are in justice, and who's able to humble those who walk proudly. Okay, I've talked for 40 minutes. Fast, of course, but I talked for 40 minutes. Hopefully, there's something that you can glean from the simpleness of the things that I was trying to share, but I want you to notice especially, God is in charge. No matter what it looks like in the United States or across the world, no matter how many problems are going on, God is in charge. He has always been in charge, and he always will be in charge, no matter what people say. He's a controlling factor. I just wish our president and the presidents in the future all recognize God as being the one in charge, as well as all the rest of the world. But when we get to the prophecies later on, we will talk about North Korea, because North Korea is a part of this, of the end times. I don't know if you ever knew that. We'll talk about China. We'll talk about Russia. We'll talk about Arabia, and especially Iran, because Iran is the one who will start the final battle. But anyway, that's my opinion. So, questions, thoughts?